He was 71 years old when he discovered the flaw. He delivered letters for 40 years, walking the same streets, knocking on the same doors, sorting envelopes that contained other people's lives, bills, birthday cards, court summons, love letters that arrived too late. He'd carried all of it without reading a word, because that was the job, because that was the rule, because Henry Dalton had spent his entire life following rules. He was invisible in the way that service workers become invisible, present but unseen, essential but forgettable. People would open their doors, take their mail, and close the door without making eye contact. After 40 years, Henry had become a fixture of the neighborhood, as permanent and unremarkable as a mailbox or a street lamp. Then he retired, and in retirement, this quiet man who'd spent his life returning what didn't belong to him discovered something extraordinary, a glitch buried deep in a casino's digital loyalty system. Over 18 months using nothing but patience, postal worker precision, and a lifetime of noticing patterns that other people missed, Henry Dalton extracted $51 million from 5 casinos and walked away before anyone realized it wasn't luck. No guns, no violence, no threats. Just a 71-year-old man with shaky hands and a hearing aid, exploiting a system that had been designed to exploit people like him. Before we dive into the story of the invisible postman who became a ghost, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that hype button to boost this episode to more true crime fans. And drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. Now let's talk about Henry Dalton and the perfect digital heist. Atlantic City, New Jersey, January 2019. The city had seen better days. The boardwalk casinos that once symbolized glamour and excess were now fighting for survival against online gambling and competition from neighboring states. Half the major properties had closed or been sold. The ones that remained were desperately trying to reinvent themselves with digital loyalty programs, phone-based reward systems, mobile apps, and endless customer data mining. The Majestic Casino, formerly the Golden Crown, before that the Atlantic Palace, was one of the survivors. 7 floors, 2,000 slot machines, 83 table games, and a restaurant that served a surprisingly decent breakfast buffet for $6.99. That's where Henry Dalton spent his Wednesday mornings. Henry had retired from the United States Postal Service in December 2018 after 41 years, 3 months, and 16 days of service. They'd given him a small ceremony in the sorting facility, a plaque that misspelled his name, Henry Dalton, and a pension that, after taxes, gave him $973 per month. His Social Security added another $1,200. His rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in a building that smelled like boiled cabbage and disappointment was $950. That left him with approximately $1,223 per month for food, utilities, medication, and whatever passed for living. Henry was always careful with money, said Margaret Ross, his neighbor in the apartment building on Vermont Avenue. He'd buy the day-old bread from the grocery store, the dented cans that were on discount. Not because he was cheap, he was just practical. He knew exactly how much everything cost. I think that came from the Postal Service, where every stamp had to be accounted for. Henry was a creature of routine, which made sense for someone who'd spent 4 decades following the same delivery routes. He woke at 5:30 a.m. every morning, couldn't break the habit even in retirement, made instant coffee with 2 sugars, no cream. Read the newspaper front to back, including the obituaries, which increasingly contained names he recognized. At 7 a.m., he'd walk 6 blocks to a diner called Mel's, not because the food was good, but because they had a senior discount and free refills on coffee. 1 egg, toast, and coffee for $3.75, including tip. Then he'd walk, miles and miles, following old postal routes from muscle memory, his body not understanding that there were no more letters to deliver. By noon, he'd be back at his apartment, exhausted but with nowhere to be. The afternoons were the hardest. Too much time, too little money, too few people who remembered his name. That's when he discovered the Majestic Casino's Senior Wednesdays promotion. Every Wednesday, the Majestic offered a special for guests over 65, free lunch buffet, $20 in free play credits, and entry into hourly prize drawings. It was a marketing strategy designed to fill the casino during slow weekday afternoons, to get seniors hooked on the sounds and lights and possibility of winning. For Henry, it was just a place to be that wasn't his apartment. He started going in February 2019. He'd arrive at 11:30 a.m., scan his loyalty card at the kiosk, collect his free credits, and eat a plate of scrambled eggs and toast at the buffet. Not very different from what he'd eaten at Mel's, but free. Then he'd sit at a video poker machine in the back corner. Machine 247, a quick-draw poker console that was slightly slower than the newer models, but more comfortable for Henry's arthritic fingers. He'd play $5 hands until his $20 in credits ran out, which usually took about 40 minutes if he played conservatively. He never expected to win, didn't care about winning. He was just passing time in a place with air conditioning and other people, even if those people ignored him. "I saw Henry every Wednesday for months," said Donna Mitchell, a cocktail waitress who worked the senior promotion shift. "Sweet old guy. Always said please and thank you. Always tipped $1 even on the free drinks. He looked like everybody's grandfather. Thin, maybe 5'8", gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, wore the same brown jacket every time. Completely forgettable, you know? Like if you passed him on the street, you'd forget his face before you reached the corner." That invisibility would become Henry's greatest asset. On March 13, 2019, Henry had an experience that would change everything. He'd finished his free play credits and was about to leave when the video poker machine froze. The screen went blue, displayed a message reading, "System update in progress," and shut down completely. Henry waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. A technician arrived, young guy, maybe 25, wearing a majestic casino tech support shirt. "Sorry about that," the technician said, not really looking at Henry. "Whole bank of machines just went offline. Some kind of server sync issue. Give me a sec." He rebooted the machine, which took another 5 minutes. When it came back online, the technician swiped a card, typed something, and nodded. "All set. Sorry for the inconvenience." Henry thanked him and decided to leave. But as he walked past the loyalty rewards kiosk near the entrance, the tall digital terminal where players could check their points balance and redeem reward, something made him stop. Curiosity, maybe, or just the postal worker's habit of double-checking everything. He swiped his card. The screen displayed his account, Henry Dalton. Current balance, 247 points. That was wrong. He'd used his $20 in free credits, which should have given him maybe 30 or 40 points depending on how much he'd wagered. But 247, he checked the transaction history on the screen. There were 2 entries for today's visit, both showing the same $20 free play credit, issued at 11:34 a.m. and again at 11:46 a.m. The system had credited him twice. Most people would have shrugged, figured it was a bonus or a glitch that would correct itself, and walked away. Henry didn't walk away. He stood there for 10 minutes, studying the screen, scrolling through transaction histories, looking at timestamps and point allocations. His postal mind, trained for 40 years to notice discrepancies, to catch mistakes in addresses or missing stamps or envelopes that didn't match their contents, was working through possibilities. This wasn't a random bonus. It was an error, a duplication caused by the system restart, which meant it might happen again. Henry didn't go to the casino the next Wednesday. Instead, he went to the public library on Atlantic Avenue, a Carnegie library built in 1903, smelling of old books and floor polish, filled with homeless people using the bathrooms and teenagers pretending to study. Henry had never owned a computer, hadn't needed one in the postal service, didn't see the point in retirement. But the library had 12 public computers, and if you had a library card, which Henry had obtained in 1979 and never used, you could reserve 1-hour sessions. He sat down at computer number 7 in the back corner near the biography section and spent an hour teaching himself how to use the Majestic Casino's website. It took 40 minutes just to figure out how to log into his loyalty account. He had to create a password, verify his email address, which took another trip to the library the next day to check the confirmation email, and navigate through 3 different menu screens. But eventually he accessed his account online. Same information as the kiosk, 247 points, 2 identical transactions from March 13. Henry sat back in the creaky library chair and thought. For the next 3 weeks, he established a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, he'd visit the library, log into his casino account, and study the transaction history. He took notes in a small spiral notebook, the kind postal workers use to log delivery exceptions, recording dates, times, point balances, and any discrepancies. He also started visiting the casino more frequently, not just Wednesdays, but Mondays and Fridays too. He'd use the minimum required play to keep his account active, usually just $10 or $20 of his own money, and watch the machines carefully. On April 9th, during a scheduled maintenance window that the casino announced via digital signs throughout the floor, Henry noticed something crucial. After the maintenance ended and the machines came back online, he checked his account at the kiosk. His balance had jumped again, not doubled, but increased by an amount that didn't match his actual play. He went back to the library and checked the online account. The transaction history showed a gap, a 10-minute window during the maintenance where no activity was logged, followed by duplicate entries for transactions that had occurred before the maintenance. The pattern became clear. When the casino's system synced data across its network, between the floor machines, the mobile app, the website, and the back-end database, certain transactions were being duplicated. Not all transactions, just specific ones involving accounts that had been active during system maintenance or network synchronization events. Henry spent another month documenting the pattern. He discovered that the casino ran automated maintenance every Tuesday at 3 a.m. and every Friday at 11 p.m. During these windows, the loyalty system would briefly go offline, then resync when it came back up. And during those resyncs, certain transactions, specifically free play credits and promotional rewards, were being duplicated in the database. Henry had a gift for patterns, said Robert Chen, his former supervisor at the Postal Service. When we'd get complaints about missing mail or misdelivered letters, Henry could trace the error back through the sorting chain just by looking at timestamps and routing codes. He'd notice things like, this envelope was processed at 2:47 p.m., but the next scan was at 2:44 p.m., which means the clock at Station B is running fast, which means all the mail from that station is being mislabeled. That kind of thinking. Now that same ability was being applied to casino databases. By May 2019, Henry understood the glitch completely, and he developed a hypothesis about how to exploit it. The Majestic Casino's loyalty program, called Crown Rewards, was designed to encourage repeat visits. Players earned points for every dollar wagered, which could be redeemed for free play, dining credits, hotel stays, or cash vouchers. The system was integrated across 5 casinos owned by the same parent company: the Majestic in Atlantic City, the Golden Sands in Philadelphia, the Crystal Bay in Baltimore, the Riverview in Pittsburgh, and the Coastal Star in Wilmington, Delaware. All 5 casinos shared the same customer database. A player could earn points at one casino and redeem them at any of the others, a feature marketed as convenience, but which also created vulnerabilities. Henry's hypothesis was simple. If he could trigger the duplication glitch consistently, he could multiply points across the network, creating value from nothing. But he needed to test it carefully. One mistake, one obvious fraud, and the system would flag his account. In June 2019, Henry did something he'd never done before. He opened a second casino loyalty account, not under his own name. That would be too obvious. He used the identity of someone who'd recently died, a former neighbor named Walter Price, who'd passed away in April from a heart attack. Henry had delivered Walter's mail for 20 years, knew his birthday, September 3rd, 1944, knew his address, knew enough personal information to create a convincing identity. It sounds cold using a dead man's name, Detective Sarah Martinez of the Atlantic City Police Department would later say. But Henry wasn't thinking of it as identity theft. In his mind, he was just testing a theory, using available data to solve a problem. That's how engineers think. That's how postal workers think. Henry walked into the Majestic Casino on a Tuesday morning, not a Wednesday, to avoid being associated with his regular routine. He approached the loyalty rewards desk and said in his soft, slightly shaky voice, "Excuse me, I'd like to sign up for a rewards card. My friend told me about your senior promotion." The clerk, a young woman named Jessica, who was more interested in her phone than customers, barely looked up. Sure, I'll need your driver's license and a signature. Henry handed over a Pennsylvania driver's license he'd obtained using Walter Price's birth certificate and social security number, documents he'd found in Walter's apartment when helping the landlord clean it out after Walter's death. The clerk scanned it, typed information into her computer, and handed Henry a plastic card. You're all set, Mr. Price. You've got $20 in free welcome credit. Enjoy. Henry thanked her and left without using the credit. Over the next 2 weeks, he built a routine with both accounts. He'd visit as Henry Dalton on Wednesdays, as Walter Price on Mondays. He'd play minimal amounts, stay under the radar, and carefully track every transaction. Then on July 2nd, during a scheduled maintenance window, Henry executed his test. Using the Henry Dalton account, he played video poker for exactly 1 hour before the 3 URDM maintenance window. He logged 32 transactions, earning 340 points. Then he left, went home, and waited. At 8:00 a.m., he went to the library and checked both accounts online. The Henry Dalton account showed 680 points, exactly double what it should have been. The maintenance resync had duplicated all the previous night's transactions. But here's what Henry had discovered that made the glitch truly exploitable. The Walter Price account, which had been inactive during the maintenance, showed no change. However, when Henry transferred 100 points from the Dalton account to the Price account using the casino's Gift Points to Friends feature, a promotional tool designed to encourage referrals, something remarkable happened. Both accounts kept the 100 points. The transfer had been logged in one database, but not properly deducted from the other during the post-maintenance reconciliation. Henry now had 680 points in the Dalton account and 100 points in the Price account. 780 total when he should have had 340. He just created 440 points from nothing, and those points could be converted to cash vouchers at a rate of 100 points per dollar. He just made 440 from a database error. More importantly, he'd proven the concept. If it worked with 2 accounts and 440 points, it could work with 10 accounts and 4,400 points, or 50 accounts, or 100. Henry didn't rush. That was the thing about him. 40 years of postal service had taught him that haste created mistakes, and mistakes created investigations. The mail got delivered on schedule not because people hurried, but because everyone followed procedures carefully, methodically, without deviation. When a letter went missing, it was almost always because someone had skipped a step, failed to scan a barcode, or sorted too quickly and grabbed the wrong envelope. Henry had built his entire career on never being the one who made those mistakes. He would approach this the same way, systematically, patiently, with documentation at every step. Over the next 3 months, July through September 2019, Henry built his infrastructure with the same careful attention he'd once applied to organizing mail routes. He created 12 additional loyalty accounts using identities of deceased individuals whose information he could access. Most were former residents on his old postal route, people whose mail he'd delivered for years, whose birthdays and social security numbers he'd seen on official documents, whose apartments he'd watched empty out after they passed away. Walter Price, who died in April at 75. Catherine Chen, 68, who'd had a stroke in her sleep in June. Robert Martinez, 72, heart attack in February. Edward Sullivan, 81, pneumonia in January. It sounds predatory when you say it out loud, Detective Martinez said later, but I think in Henry's mind, he'd rationalized it differently. These people were gone. Their identities were just data sitting in government databases that would otherwise go unused, eventually purged. He wasn't hurting anyone alive. He was just recycling information the same way he'd recycled undeliverable mail for 40 years, taking something discarded and giving it new purpose. Each identity required careful construction. Henry couldn't just use a name. He needed legitimate documentation that would pass the casino's verification systems. He'd visit different Department of Motor Vehicles offices across New Jersey and Pennsylvania, traveling by bus to avoid creating patterns with his car's GPS. At each DMV, he'd apply for a state identification card using authentic death certificates and social security numbers he'd obtained from public records. The death certificates were easy. New Jersey and Pennsylvania both made them available for purchase to anyone willing to pay the $15 fee and fill out a form. The social security numbers took more work, but Henry had spent 4 decades seeing them on official correspondence, memorizing sequences, understanding the patterns of how they were issued. He'd memorize details about each identity before visiting the DMV: birthdays, middle names, previous addresses, mother's maiden names. He practiced signatures until they looked natural, shaky and old, because that's what the DMV clerks expected from applicants in their 70s. "I need to get an ID," he'd tell the clerk in his soft, slightly confused voice. "I lost my wallet last month, and I've been putting this off. Never thought I'd need it at my age, but my daughter says I can't fly without proper identification." The clerks, usually overworked and dealing with dozens of applications per day, rarely asked follow-up questions. Old people losing their wallets was common. Old people being confused about bureaucratic procedures was expected. Within 2 months, Henry had 13 legitimate state ID cards, each in a different name, each with his photograph. Then he'd register each identity at different casinos in the network, spreading them out to avoid patterns, never signing up more than 2 accounts at any single location. He'd wear different clothes for each registration: brown jacket for Walter Price, blue windbreaker for Catherine Chen, black cardigan for Robert Martinez, small changes that made the security cameras record different-looking people. At the Atlantic City Public Library, using computer number 7 in the back corner, where the security camera had a blind spot caused by a filing cabinet, Henry created a spreadsheet. He'd learned how to use Microsoft Excel through YouTube tutorials, watching them at 0.5 playback speed, taking notes in his spiral notebook, rewinding sections 3 or 4 times until he understood. It took him 2 weeks to master basic spreadsheet functions, but once he did, he built a database that would have impressed data analysts. Columns for account name, casino location, card number, PIN, current balance, last activity date, maintenance window schedule, transaction history, notes. He developed a color coding system: green for accounts ready for exploitation, yellow for accounts that needed more activity to look legitimate, red for accounts that had been flagged or showed suspicious patterns. His spiral notebook became filled with codes only he could decipher: HD, WP, 150 PTs, 715, 3, 17 postmate, success 150 DUP, WP, KC, 75 PTs, 718, 11 or 9, precinct, fail, no DUP, retry 722. KC, HD, 300 PTs, 722, 2331 postmate, success, Plaruso dupe, 20 PT loss tolerable. To anyone else flipping through the notebook, it would look like the scribblings of someone with early dementia. Random letters, numbers, abbreviations that meant nothing. To Henry, it was a precise map of the casino's database architecture and a blueprint of its vulnerabilities, a record of every successful exploitation. The key to the entire operation was timing and distribution. Henry never triggered the duplication glitch more than twice per month per account. This was crucial. If an account suddenly showed a pattern of duplicated transactions during every maintenance window, the system's fraud detection algorithms, primitive as they were, might eventually flag it for review. Instead, he'd play legitimately most of the time. He'd visit casinos, use his loyalty cards, gamble with real money, usually $20 to $50 per session, earning points through actual slot machine play or video poker. This created a pattern of normal activity, a baseline of legitimate transactions that would mask the occasional duplicated entry. When he did exploit the glitch, he'd transfer points between accounts in small increments, never more than a few hundred at a time, creating a web of microtransactions that spread across the network like roots through soil. One account would send 50 points to another, which would send 75 points to a third, which would send 100 back to the first. The points would multiply during maintenance windows, creating value from nothing, distributed across so many small transactions that no single audit would catch the pattern. He also learned to deliberately lose sometimes. If an account won too consistently, even in a loyalty system, it might attract attention. So Henry would occasionally cash out points for dining credits he'd never use, or redeem them for promotional items he'd throw away, creating losses that made the account look like a typical amateur gambler. By October 2019, his 12 accounts, plus his original Henry Dalton account, collectively held approximately 247,000 points, worth $2,170 in cash value. It was time to test whether he could actually extract money from the system. On October 17th, a Thursday afternoon, Henry drove 2 hours to Philadelphia in his 1998 Honda Civic, a car so old and forgettable that nobody would ever remember seeing it. He parked 3 blocks away from the Golden Sands Casino, in a public lot where the attendant sat in a booth reading a magazine and never looked at faces. Henry walked to the casino wearing clothes he'd purchased specifically for this trip. A blue windbreaker he'd bought at Goodwill for $4, khaki pants from a discount store, white sneakers. Not his usual outfit. Just another old man in generic clothes. He entered through the side entrance, avoiding the main lobby where security presence was heaviest. He went directly to an automated loyalty kiosk, the kind with touchscreens and no human attendance, and inserted the Walter Price loyalty card. The screen displayed, current balance 50,247 points. Redeem for cash? YN. Henry selected Y. How much would you like to redeem? Max, 502.47. Henry entered, $500. Treasury. Processing. Your cash voucher is printing. Please take your voucher to any cashier window or ATM. A paper voucher emerged from the slot, printed with a barcode and the Golden Sands Casino logo. Henry took it, walked to the automated voucher redemption machine, a glorified ATM that converted vouchers to cash, and inserted it. 5 $100 bills slid out. Henry took the cash, folded it carefully into his wallet, and walked out of the casino. Total time inside, 7 minutes. No alarms, no security guards approaching him, no questions asked. The system had logged it as a normal redemption, one of probably 100 that day. An elderly man cashing out some points he'd accumulated. Nothing suspicious. Henry drove home with the cash in his jacket pocket, his hands steady on the steering wheel, despite his heart beating faster than it had in years. He'd done it. He'd extracted real money from the system. The concept had become reality. That night, lying in his narrow bed in his one-room apartment, listening to sirens wail somewhere in the distance and his neighbor's television playing too loud through the thin walls, Henry thought about what he'd accomplished. Not the $500, though that was more money than he usually had at one time. It was the proof, the confirmation that the system's weakness was real, that his calculations were correct, that the invisible postman had found a crack in the casino's armor. And if he could take $500, he could take $5,000, or $50,000, or more. Not through greed, at least that's what Henry told himself. Through precision, through understanding the system better than the people who'd built it. It felt like justice, like 40 years of following rules while watching other people break them, and prosper had finally earned him one chance to do the same. He'd spent his entire life returning what wasn't his, delivering letters he could have opened, money orders he could have cashed, checks that weren't made out to him. Maybe it was time to keep one. By January 2020, Henry had expanded to 43 accounts. The COVID-19 pandemic, which would shut down the world in March, actually helped his operation. Casinos, desperate for revenue as visitors disappeared, increased their digital promotions and loyalty bonuses, creating more opportunities for duplication. They also reduced their IT security staff, cost-cutting measures during the crisis, which meant fewer people monitoring the database for anomalies. Henry adapted his strategy. He started using prepaid debit cards to fund his gambling, cards purchased with cash at convenience stores, untraceable to his real identity. He'd load $50 or $100 onto a card, use it at a casino under one of his false identities, earn points, trigger the duplication glitch, and then abandon the card. He also discovered that the casino's mobile app, launched in May 2020 to accommodate contactless gaming during the pandemic, had an even more exploitable vulnerability. When a player used the mobile app to transfer points between accounts, the transaction would sometimes process twice, once in the app's local database and again in the main server database when the app synced. If the app lost connection during the sync, which happened frequently given the casino's old wireless network infrastructure, the transaction would retry automatically, creating duplicates. Henry tested this by deliberately standing in areas of the casino with poor cell reception, near the service elevators, in the parking garage by the loading docks, and initiating transfers while watching his connection bars fluctuate. It worked beautifully. By June 2020, his network had grown to 127 accounts, collectively holding 5.4 million points, worth $54,000. He was cashing out gradually, $2,000 to $3,000 per month, spread across multiple accounts and locations. Never enough to trigger IRS reporting requirements, which started at $10,000. Never at the same casino twice in a row. The money went into safe deposit boxes at 3 different banks, physical cash, untraceable, slowly accumulating. Henry continued living in the same apartment, eating the same $3.75 breakfast at Mel's, walking the same streets. His neighbors noticed nothing different except that he seemed happier, less tired, occasionally whistling as he walked. I asked him once if he'd won the lottery, Margaret Ross recalled. He smiled and said, "Something like that. I figured he'd gotten a cost of living increase on his pension. I was happy for him." By December 2020, Henry's operation had reached industrial scale. He'd created 218 accounts across the 5-casino network. He'd identified 17 different ways to trigger the duplication glitch, each with slightly different timing requirements and success rates. He'd developed automation scripts, simple programs he'd learned to write using online tutorials, that he'd run on the library computers to manage point transfers efficiently. His monthly cash out had increased to $47,000, spread across so many small transactions that no single casino noticed the drain. By March 2021, he'd extracted $3.2 million. By August 2021, $11.7 million. By December 2021, $28.4 million. He'd become one of the most successful digital fraudsters in casino history, and nobody knew his name. The red flag that finally triggered an investigation came from an unexpected source, a routine audit of promotional expenses. In January 2022, Crystal Bay Casino's accounting department noticed something odd in their quarterly financial report. The casino had awarded $847,000 in loyalty rewards redemptions during Q4 2021, but player activity data suggested they should have awarded only $612,000. The discrepancy was initially blamed on a calculation error, but when a forensic accountant named David Park dug deeper, he found something disturbing. Loyalty points were being redeemed at a rate that exceeded point generation by approximately 38%. It's like if you had a bank account with $1,000, but somehow you were able to withdraw $1,980, Park explained later. The math didn't work. Either points were being generated that shouldn't exist, or redemptions were being processed that didn't match actual awards. Park expanded his audit to include the other 4 casinos in the network. All of them showed similar discrepancies, ranging from 31% to 44% excess redemptions. Collectively, across 18 months, the 5 casinos had lost approximately $51.3 million in fraudulent loyalty point redemptions. When I brought this to management, Park said, they didn't believe me at first. How could someone steal $50 million in loyalty points? It's not like cash. It's a closed system, but the numbers didn't lie. The casino group launched an internal investigation in February 2022, bringing in cybersecurity consultants from a firm called Digital Fortress Solutions. The investigation took 3 months. Analysts combed through transaction logs searching for patterns. What they found was remarkable: a network of 218 accounts, all exhibiting similar behaviors: small, frequent transactions, point transfers during maintenance windows, redemptions spread across multiple locations. The accounts had different names, addresses, and identification documents, but they shared subtle commonalities. They'd all been created within a narrow time frame. They all used similar betting patterns, and, critically, they all showed login activity from the same 3 IP addresses. 2 of the addresses belonged to Majestic Casino's floor Wi-Fi network. The third belonged to the Atlantic City Public Library. Security camera footage from the library showed the same person using Computer 7 repeatedly between March 2019 and January 2022. An elderly man with gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a brown jacket. Facial recognition software ran his image against casino surveillance footage. Matches appeared at all 5 casinos. The same man, sometimes using different names at the registration desk, but always the same face. "We thought we were looking for a sophisticated criminal organization," said Detective Martinez. "A hacking group, maybe Russian or Chinese operators, using advanced techniques to exploit the system. What we found was one 73-year-old man with a library card and a gift for noticing patterns. Police obtained warrants for the library computers and pulled the transaction histories. They traced the accounts, identified the false identities, and eventually connected them all back to one person. Henry Dalton, retired postal worker, resident of 847 Vermont Avenue, apartment 3B. On the morning of March 17, 2022, Detective Martinez and 4 officers arrived at Henry's building. They knocked on his door. No answer. The landlord let them in. The apartment was empty, not ransacked, not abandoned in a panic, just empty, clean and organized, as if Henry had simply decided not to come home one day. In the small kitchen, on a counter that still smelled faintly of instant coffee, police found a stack of envelopes, the old-fashioned kind, with handwritten addresses. Inside were prepaid debit cards, casino loyalty cards, and a small leather notebook filled with codes and timestamps. Also on the counter, a single piece of paper with a handwritten note in neat, careful script. After 40 years of returning what wasn't mine, I thought I'd keep one. Henry Dalton had vanished. The investigation into Henry's whereabouts began immediately. Police checked his bank accounts. The small checking account he'd maintained for 40 years had been closed on March 14th, 3 days before they'd identified him as a suspect. The balance of $247.18 had been withdrawn in cash. They contacted his daughter, Rebecca Dalton Morrison, who lived in Oregon and hadn't spoken to her father in 11 years. "We were estranged," she told investigators. "He was a good father when I was young, but after Mom died, he just shut down, became distant. I tried to maintain contact, but he made it clear he wanted to be left alone. Last I heard, he was barely scraping by on his pension." When told about the $51 million, she laughed, not from joy, but from disbelief. "My father, the man who refused to take leftovers from restaurants because he said it was wasteful? You're telling me he stole $50 million from casinos?" They checked with the post office, his former colleagues. No one had heard from him. He'd attended his retirement party in December 2018, thanked everyone politely, and disappeared from their lives. They issued a warrant for his arrest and distributed his photo to airports, bus stations, and border crossings. Federal agencies got involved. This was wire fraud, identity theft, computer crimes. The FBI assigned 2 agents to the case, but Henry was gone. No credit card activity, no passport on record, no flight bookings, car rentals, or hotel reservations under his name, or any of the false identities they'd uncovered. "He planned this," Martinez said, "not impulsively, not in a panic. He spent months, maybe years, preparing his exit. He knew eventually we'd find the pattern. He just needed enough time to disappear before we did." In April 2022, a report came from a convenience store clerk in Delaware. An old guy matching the photo came in and bought a prepaid phone card. Paid cash. Didn't say much. In June, a possible sighting at a library in Richmond, Virginia. The man used computer number 4, logged into an email account for 6 minutes, then left. By the time police arrived, he was gone. In September, a woman in Florida called the tip line. "I think I saw him at a grocery store. He was buying cat food. I don't know why I remember that. He just had this gentle way about him. Very polite. Reminded me of my father." But none of the leads went anywhere concrete. Henry had become what he'd always been, invisible. The casinos eventually recovered about $8.2 million by freezing accounts before they could be fully drained. The remaining $43 million was gone, converted to cash, hidden somewhere in safe deposit boxes or offshore accounts, or buried in the desert for all anyone knew. The 5 casinos quietly settled with their insurance companies and upgraded their database architecture, hiring expensive consultants to patch the loyalty system vulnerabilities. They never publicly disclosed the full extent of the breach, afraid it would damage consumer confidence. The FBI officially classified the case as inactive in January 2023, though it remains technically open. Henry Dalton is wanted on 14 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and computer crimes. If caught, he faces up to 20 years in federal prison, but he hasn't been caught. And after 2 years of searching, most investigators believe he never will be. There are theories about where Henry went. Some believe he died shortly after disappearing, that the stress of being discovered triggered a heart attack or stroke, and he's buried in an unmarked grave somewhere. The $43 million forever lost. Others think he fled to a country without extradition treaties, maybe somewhere in South America or Southeast Asia, where an elderly American with cash can live comfortably and anonymously. Detective Martinez has her own theory. I think he's still here, in the United States, probably somewhere quiet, a small town where people mind their own business. He's living simply, not drawing attention, maybe working part-time at a library or a bookstore. The money doesn't matter to him. It never did. What mattered was proving he could beat the system. And he did. In the apartment Henry left behind, investigators found very few personal belongings. No photos, no mementos, no connection to a life before retirement. Just the notebook with his codes, the envelopes with the fake IDs, and one photograph, faded from the 1970s, of a young man in a postal uniform standing in front of a mail truck, smiling. The man in the photo looked nothing like the Henry Dalton who disappeared in 2022. That young postal worker had hope in his eyes, possibility in his smile. He thought hard work and following rules would lead to a good life. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned differently. Henry spent his whole life being invisible, said Margaret Ross, his former neighbor, when interviewed by a journalist in 2023. He delivered our mail, but who remembers their mail carrier? He followed every rule, worked every day, did everything right. And what did it get him? A pension that barely covered rent and an apartment that smelled like failure. Can you really blame him for taking something back? The casino industry doesn't see it that way. To them, Henry Dalton is a criminal who exploited a system vulnerability to steal millions. They've used his case to justify increased surveillance, stricter identity verification, and more invasive data collection. But to many others, especially elderly people on fixed incomes, people who've watched their pensions evaporate and their savings disappear while corporations post record profits. Henry is something else entirely. He's proof that the system can be beaten, that invisible people can become ghosts, that sometimes, just sometimes, the house doesn't win.